You think a man falls in love because of beauty, because of perfect timing, because of attention, because you said the right thing at the right moment. But that is not what pulls him in the deepest way. Here is what most people never see. A man does not fall in love when he is being chased. He falls when something inside him becomes quiet for the first time in a long time. He falls when your presence feels like peace in a life that has been all noise. He falls when your absence makes him reflect instead of just move on. He falls when your energy makes him pause and ask himself if the life he is living is really the life he wants. That is where it starts. Not in the loud moments, not in the obvious moments, but in silence. In contrast, in the strange calm that stays with him after you leave. And if you stay with me, this will make more sense than almost anything you have heard about love. Because men do not always love in the way people talk about online. It is deeper, slower, more hidden. And once you understand it, you stop forcing what was never meant to be forced. And you begin to see why some connections fade fast, while others grow roots that are almost impossible to break. A man is not opened by pressure. He is not held by constant effort to impress him. And he is rarely moved by emotional intensity alone. In fact, the more pressure he feels, the more he pulls back. The more he feels watched, tested, or pushed, the more he disappears into himself. What truly opens his heart is much quieter than that. It is emotional safety. Simple words but powerful. Most men move through life carrying silent weight. They are expected to be strong, to provide, to stay steady, to solve problems, to keep going even when they are tired. And because of that, many of them almost never feel free to just be human. So when he meets someone around whom he does not need to perform, defend, or prove his value every second, something inside him starts to soften. He feels less guarded. He breathes differently. He does not even always understand it at first. He only knows that around you, he does not feel the same pressure he feels everywhere else. And that matters more than many people realize, because love often begins the moment a person feels they can finally rest without being judged for needing rest. Keep listening, because this is where the shift begins. And once it begins, his heart starts moving before his words ever catch up. Emotional safety is not built through control. It is not built by checking every move, reading every silence as rejection, or demanding non-stop reassurance. It grows through acceptance, through steadiness, through the feeling that honesty will not be punished later. When a man feels that his words will not be used against him in a future argument, he becomes more open. When he feels that a quiet moment will not be turned into drama, he begins to trust. When he feels that he can be honest without being attacked, something deep inside him finally relaxes. Trust is the first real doorway to love, not attraction, not chemistry. Trust. At first, he may barely notice the change. He just feels lighter around you. He talks more. He filters less. He stops feeling like he is walking on emotional thin ice. And slowly, without force, he begins to connect your presence with peace. For a man who has lived under pressure for years, peace feels rare, it feels healing, it feels magnetic. And this is important. Safety also needs space. Too much intensity too fast can overwhelm a man who is still learning how to trust. Real connection grows in rhythm, closer than breathing room, openness than reflection. If connection feels like confinement, fear enters the room. But if closeness still leaves room for freedom, his fear begins to fade, and love gets the space it needs to grow on its own. A man rarely falls deeply where he feels judged for every flaw. Judgment creates resistance. It makes him hide. It makes him protect the parts of himself that feel unfinished, uncertain, or weak. And whatever stays hidden can never be fully loved because it is never fully seen. But when he feels that even his imperfect parts are not met with rejection, he starts to show more of who he really is. He lets you see the rough edges, the doubts, the places where he is still becoming. And the more real he becomes with you, the stronger the emotional bond grows. This is how safety turns into attachment. Not because he was convinced, not because he was chased, but because he was allowed to unfold at his own speed. He comes back because he feels understood. He stays because he feels at ease in a world that often asks too much from him. And in that quiet kind of acceptance, love begins to take shape. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. If you are still here, notice this carefully. A man is not only affected by how much love you give him, he is deeply affected by how safe he feels receiving it. That changes everything. Because a person can want love and still run from it if it feels heavy, unstable, or costly. But when love feels calm, clean, and real, the heart stops fighting and starts leaning in. Then there is another layer, and this one is just as important: respect. Many people understand attraction. Fewer understand respect. Yet for many men, respect is the silent base under everything. A man can survive emotional distance. He can survive stress. He can even survive a season of silence. But what quietly breaks something inside him is the feeling that he is not respected for who he is trying to become. Respect is not about feeding ego. It is not about putting him above anyone. It is about recognition. It is about seeing that his effort matters, that his direction matters, that his identity is not being reduced, mocked, or constantly questioned. When a man feels respected, something stabilizes in him. He becomes more grounded, more present, more willing to open, because respect gives him dignity, and dignity lets him soften without feeling weak. He starts to connect your presence with emotional balance instead of pressure. Real respect is not loud. It is not endless praise or fake admiration. Too much of that feels empty. Real respect is quiet and clear. It is in how you respond when he talks about his purpose. It is in how you listen when he speaks about struggle. It is in how you do not compete with his direction, but try to understand it. And when he feels that you are not trying to shrink his world, but actually see it, his heart opens in a much deeper way. The real test of respect is not how someone treats him when he is winning. Almost anyone can admire strength when it is obvious. The real test is what happens when he is uncertain, rebuilding, tired, or still finding his way. That is when he watches closely, even if he never says it. He notices who stays steady and who changes their energy toward him. If he feels judged in his weaker moments, he starts to close off. He hides the process. He becomes guarded, not because he does not care, but because he no longer feels safe being vulnerable. But when he feels respected, even while he is imperfect, something powerful changes. He begins to trust that he does not need to be flawless to be valued. And that kind of trust creates a devotion that cannot be forced. Respect also means letting him contribute in a healthy way, letting him show up, letting him feel that his presence adds something meaningful to your life, not from dependency, not from helplessness, but from healthy appreciation. When a man feels useful, seen, and valued, he becomes more invested. He does not feel replaceable. He does not feel like he is competing just to matter. He feels like he is building something with you. And there is a truth here that many people miss. A man who feels disrespected often detaches emotionally long before he ever leaves physically. He may still be there, still talking, still showing up, but inwardly he has already started to disappear. When respect is steady, something deeper begins to form. He does not just feel desired, he feels grounded. He does not just feel wanted for a moment, he feels valued in his identity. And in that kind of space, love does not need to be chased. It starts growing naturally because his inner world feels acknowledged and his outer path feels supported. But that is only part of the picture. because every connection reaches a stage where familiarity begins to replace curiosity. And this is where many bonds quietly lose their depths. In the beginning, everything feels fresh. Every message has energy. Every conversation reveals something new. Every moment carries discovery. But when everything becomes too available too quickly, something important begins to fade. Mystery. A man does not only fall in love with what he understands. He also falls in love with what he is still discovering. The mind is drawn toward depth, toward layers, toward something that cannot be fully known in one day or one phase. When everything about a person is immediately exposed, there is no room left for imagination. And when imagination disappears, curiosity slowly fades with it. This does not mean playing games. It does not mean acting cold or hiding your truth. Real mystery is simply depth that unfolds over time. It is having layers that cannot be fully understood in one conversation, 1 week, or one emotional rush. When a man senses that there is still more to learn about you, more to understand, more to feel, he stays mentally engaged, not because he is confused, but because he is intrigued. There is a difference between being fully exposed and being truly known. Exposure is instant. Knowing takes time. It grows through moments, patterns, reactions, silence, experience. Men often fall deeper, not in complete clarity, but in the process of ongoing discovery. That unfolding keeps the mind active. It keeps the heart involved. If someone reveals every emotional layer too quickly, with no pacing, the connection can lose its sense of exploration. The mind goes passive. There's nothing left to uncover, nothing left to wonder about. And when the mind becomes passive, emotional excitement starts to weaken. But when there is balance, when presence is warm but not overwhelming, when feelings are shared with rhythm instead of overflow, he stays engaged. Mystery also lives in natural unpredictability, not chaos, not mixed signals, just authentic depth. He cannot predict every reaction, every thought, every emotional color in advance, and that keeps him attentive. A person who feels too easy to read in every situation can slowly be taken for granted. But when there are meaningful silences, surprising insights, new sides of personality, and signs of growth, the connection stays alive in his mind. And when something stays alive in the mind, it often stays alive in the heart much longer than people expect. He begins to think about you even when you are not there, not because of confusion, but because of depth. He starts to feel that your presence cannot be replaced by something shallow or easy. He starts to value the parts of you he has not fully understood yet. Over time, that natural mystery becomes emotional gravity. It does not push him. It pulls him in slowly, steadily, without force. And that matters, because what is forced often collapses. What is drawn naturally tends to last. Now here comes another truth that most people misunderstand. They think the more time you spend together, the stronger the bond becomes automatically. But emotional connection does not grow only through constant presence. Sometimes too much presence removes the very thing that lets feelings deepen. Space. Healthy distance is not the enemy of love. Very often, it is the place where love becomes clear. When a man is constantly surrounded, constantly engaged, constantly stimulated, his mind adjusts quickly. What is always present often becomes normal, not because it has no value, but because it has no contrast. Human emotion is shaped not only by presence, but by the movement between presence and absence. And it is in that contrast that awareness starts to wake up. Stay with this part, because this is where many people either build deep attachment or unknowingly suffocate it before it has room to breathe. When there is distance, even a small one, something interesting happens inside the mind. He starts to notice what is missing, the conversations he had without thinking, the comfort he received without even naming it, the energy he felt without stopping to examine it. Distance creates reflection, because when something is always available, it rarely demands full attention. But when it is not instantly there, awareness sharpens. This is not about playing games. It is not about making him anxious on purpose. It is about allowing natural space for emotional breathing. A man needs moments where he is not overloaded, where he is not constantly reacting, where he can step back into his own inner world. In that space, he begins to think, and thinking leads to realization. Realization leads to clarity. If you are always present, always available, always replying instantly, there may be no gap for him to feel the contrast of your presence. But when there is a healthy rhythm of closeness and space, he starts to notice how he feels in both states. And often it is in your absence that his emotional truth becomes clearer than in your presence, because absence removes distraction and brings feeling into focus. He starts to recognize what feels different when you are not there. He starts to understand how your energy affects his emotional state. He begins to see that certain feelings exist more strongly because you are part of his life. Distance can also strengthen appreciation. When someone is always close, appreciation can fade into habit. But when there is space, even brief space, value becomes clearer again. The mind begins to respect what is not constantly accessible. Emotional memory becomes active. He does not just remember what happened, he remembers how he felt. And that is where attachment often deepens quietly, because love is not formed only in interaction, it is also formed in memory. When a man sits alone and remembers that your presence made him calmer, more understood, more centered, he starts connecting you with emotional grounding. That connection can become stronger than non-stop interaction. But balance is everything. Healthy distance is not rejection, it is not coldness, it is not pulling away to create confusion. It is simply space that lets emotion breathe. A bond without space can become overwhelming. A bond with balanced space becomes meaningful. It allows both people to remain whole while still connected. And in that rhythm, something natural happens. He does not feel chased, yet he does not feel abandoned. He feels enough connection to stay linked and enough freedom to reflect. In that reflection, his emotions mature. Instead of rushing, he begins to understand not only what he feels in a moment, but what he truly feels about the connection itself. And slowly, without pressure, clarity becomes attachment. At a certain point, attraction is no longer enough. Chemistry may begin the bond. Curiosity may keep it alive for a while. But what finally determines whether a man sees a future is something more grounded than excitement. It is alignment, shared values, shared direction, a shared way of seeing life. Because when a man begins to feel that your inner world moves in harmony with his growth, something changes inside him. He stops seeing you as only part of the present moment. He starts seeing you as part of the life he is building. In the beginning, he may be drawn by beauty, energy, personality, emotion, but over time, a deeper question rises inside him. Not just, how does this feel right now, but where is this going? That is the shift from attraction to intention. If he feels that your values fight against his direction, even strong attraction will not quiet the tension inside him. Deep down, he knows that love without alignment eventually creates friction instead of peace. Shared values are not about agreeing on every surface opinion. They go deeper. They touch how a person handles growth, responsibility, loyalty, respect, family, effort, emotional maturity, and purpose. When he feels that you naturally resonate with those deeper principles, something in him becomes more steady. He feels understood at a level that goes beyond sweet words. And that kind of understanding makes commitment feel natural instead of forced. There is a strong shift that happens when he no longer feels that he must explain his direction just to be accepted. When he feels that your view of life does not resist his purpose but supports it, he becomes more open, more expressive, and more quietly committed. His energy is no longer split between connection and conflict. He can move forward with someone who understands the road he is on. Alignment does not mean becoming the same person. It does not mean losing individuality. Real connection thrives when two distinct people move in harmony without becoming copies of each other. A man can appreciate difference. He can even love difference. But if those differences keep pulling the relationship in opposite directions, emotional investment becomes harder to maintain. When values are aligned, even challenges feel different. Disagreements do not automatically create distance. They create understanding, because both people are rooted in similar principles. There is less fear that one conflict will destroy everything, because the base of the bond is built on something deeper than temporary emotion. Over time, this creates certainty, not just excitement, not just intensity, certainty. And certainty changes a man. He begins to feel that the connection is not only emotional, it is livable, real, sustainable. He starts including you in his vision without needing to be pushed. Conversations shift, decisions shift. Future thinking becomes instinctive because alignment quietly tells him this person belongs in the life I am building. Perhaps the strongest part of alignment is this: it reduces inner conflict. A man no longer feels torn between his relationship and his purpose. The relationship starts to support the purpose instead of distracting from it. And in that harmony, attachment grows in a deeper way. Because at the end of the day, a man does not only fall in love with how someone makes him feel in a beautiful moment. He falls in love with how naturally they fit into the life he is trying to create. And when he sees that your values move in the same direction as his future, he stops seeing you as a temporary presence and starts feeling that you belong within the structure of his life. But even then, one final thing decides whether love becomes lasting trust: consistency. Words can sound beautiful, promises can be made easily, intentions can feel strong in emotional moments. But over time, a man does not build deep trust on what he hears in intense moments. He builds it on what he experiences again and again. Consistency is the quiet proof that feelings are real. It is not about perfection. It is not about never making mistakes. It is about emotional reliability. It is about showing up with the same core energy across different moments. Not robotic, not flat, just grounded. And when he feels that your presence is steady rather than chaotic, something inside him finally stops bracing for impact. Many men already deal with enough unpredictability in life. Pressure changes, plans shift, responsibilities grow. The outside world is unstable enough, so when he finds someone whose presence feels steady, not controlling, not smothering, but steady, he naturally leans closer, because consistency builds trust in a way intensity never can. Intensity can create sparks, it can create excitement, it can create strong emotional highs. But trust is built through repetition. He sees that your words match your actions. He notices that what you say one day is not reversed the next for no clear reason. He realizes that your presence is not built only on mood, but on self-awareness. And that is where consistency connects back to emotional safety. When a man knows what to expect in a healthy way, he stops feeling like he must constantly protect himself. He does not need to overread every reaction. He does not need to guess where he stands every day. He begins to trust the rhythm of the bond. And in that rhythm, emotional investment grows almost by itself. But consistency is not only about showing up when things are easy. It becomes even more powerful when things are hard. In moments of misunderstanding, stress, distance, or tension, your grounded way of being tells him more than 100 romantic speeches ever could. This is where love stops being performance and starts becoming character. If he sees that your core energy does not collapse when things get messy, he begins to respect your emotional maturity. That does not mean suppressing emotion. It does not mean becoming numb or pretending to be unbothered. It means that even when you are upset, there is still clarity. Even when you are disappointed, there is still self-control. Even when you need space, it does not become chaos. It stays rooted in awareness. And over time, this creates something powerful in his inner world. Predictability without boredom. Stability without stagnation. He begins to understand your emotional language. He trusts your reactions. He stops feeling like he is standing on unstable ground. And in that feeling, he stays more deeply, not because he is trapped, but because it feels safe to remain. Consistency also builds memory. When he looks back on the connection, he does not mainly remember confusion. He remembers reliability. He remembers that your actions lined up with your words. He remembers a pattern, and patterns shape trust. What repeats becomes believable. What becomes believable becomes valuable. And what becomes valuable becomes hard to let go of. This is how lasting attachment is often built, not from one perfect night, not from one emotional confession, but from the repeated experience of being met with steadiness in a world that rarely stays still for long. And when you combine all of this, emotional safety, respect, mystery, healthy space, shared values, and consistency, love no longer needs to be dragged into existence. It starts breathing on its own, quietly, steadily, deeply. A man begins to choose you not because he was cornered, but because his heart feels at home. He chooses you because around you he can rest, grow, reflect, contribute, and still remain himself. He chooses you because your presence does not just excite him for a moment, it strengthens him over time. That is the difference between a connection that burns fast and one that becomes unforgettable. So if you want to understand how a man truly falls in love, stop thinking only in terms of attraction. Start thinking in terms of what his inner world experiences around you. Does he feel peace or pressure, respect or reduction, depth or overexposure, freedom or confinement, harmony or hidden conflict, stability or emotional confusion? These are the questions that shape the future of love. And here is the final truth. A man often falls the deepest when he does not feel pushed at all, when love meets him softly, when truth arrives without noise, when care feels steady, when your presence becomes a place where his guarded parts no longer need armor. That is when his heart begins to move, slowly, quietly, but for real. And once it is real, it runs far deeper than most people ever see.